we always think about public speaking as that thing you do on a stage, right?
Right.
Like giving a best man speech or doing a presentation at work.
Yeah, for sure.
But have you ever actually thought about how that core skill, like being able to articulate your thoughts clearly and confidently, really shows up in your daily life in ways you wouldn't expect?
That's interesting.
Think about someone like Josh Shipp, right?
Mhm.
This guy, he went through some really tough stuff, but it was that ability to share his story in a way that really connected with people
Yeah.
that allowed him to make an impact.
Yeah.
And it makes you think there's something powerful about being able to really speak your mind well.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're going to deep dive into today.
Okay.
We're going to use The Art of Public Speaking by Stephen Lucas and Paul Staub as our guide. We're going to break down some of the core principles of communication that really makes an impact.
Yeah, and it's not just about like getting over that fear of the microphone, right?
Right.
Although that's a big part of it for a lot of people. What's really fascinating is how those foundations of public speaking, they actually shape so much of how we interact every day
Right.
and how we try to get our point across, whether you're talking to a whole room full of people or just explaining something to a coworker. So in this deep dive, we're going to look at the history of public speaking. It's a long and influential history.
Yeah.
And how it shaped societies. We'll also look at the connections it has to our daily conversations, but more importantly, what makes it different.
Totally. And, let's be real. The idea of speaking in front of a lot of people, for most of us, it's nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
So we're going
Okay.
to look at that feeling, why it happens, and really importantly, what you can do to kind of manage those butterflies.
Definitely. And, we'll also look at the connection between public speaking and critical thinking.
Hmm.
You might be surprised how much they're related.
Okay.
Then we'll break down the main parts of the speech communication process. Who's involved, what's being communicated, how it gets across, who's listening, and what can get in the way. And finally, because our world's so connected these days, we can't forget how important cultural awareness is when you're speaking publicly. So we'll touch on navigating all that.
Right.
Our goal is to give you a really solid base in all this. And you'll see this stuff's super useful, whether you're giving a formal presentation or just trying to communicate better in any situation.
Awesome. So let's start at the beginning. Public speaking, it's not some new thing we just came up with, right? It's got some history behind it.
Right. It's fascinating how deep public speaking goes in human history. Like, did you know that pretty much every culture on Earth has a word for someone who's good at speaking in public?
Huh.
An orator.
Okay.
And get this, the oldest guidebook we know about for giving good speeches, it was written in Egypt something like 4,500 years ago.
Wow.
That's ancient.
That's mind-blowing.
Like being eloquent, being able to speak well. It was really important in ancient India, all over Africa, in China, even in cultures in the Americas before Europeans got there. It wasn't just like a bonus skill. It was a skill that people valued.
Wow. That really puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
So this isn't just some modern thing that we suddenly need to learn. It's been a key part of how humans interact for thousands of years.
Totally.
Makes you wonder, why was public speaking so consistently important across all these different cultures and times?
Yeah, that is a really good question. If we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, we see that in classical Greece and Rome, public speaking was a central part of education and civic life. You think about Aristotle's rhetoric from the 3rd century BC.
Oh, yeah?
It's still like a key text today.
Yeah.
And Roman figures, guys like Cicero, they used their powerful speeches to speak up for liberty. And he also wrote a ton about the art of speaking well. Over the centuries, thinkers like Quintilian, St. Augustine, Francis Bacon, and Kenneth Burke, they've all thought about the power and the principles of rhetoric.
Okay.
And more recently, communication research has brought a more scientific lens to understanding what actually makes a speech effective.
Interesting.
So it's been this ongoing exploration and development for thousands of years.
So from those ancient handbooks to modern communication labs, it's clear that this is a field with a lot of depth. Now, I think a lot of people might think public speaking, oh, that's completely different from just chatting with your friends, right? But our source talks about some interesting ways they're actually pretty similar.
Yeah, this is such a key point because it shows that you already have some of the basic skills you need for public speaking.
Okay.
Think about it. When you give someone directions, you naturally put your thoughts in order.
Right.
You don't just shout out random landmarks. You guide them step by step.
Right.
That need for structure, it's already there in everyday conversations.
That's so true. You wouldn't say, like, Turn left after the blue house, but first remember that diner you passed a while back. You naturally put things in order.
Exactly. And think about how you change how you talk depending on who you're talking to.
Oh, yeah.
If you're explaining something complicated to a kid versus explaining it to a coworker, you're going to use different words and different examples, right?
Yeah.
That's audience adaptation, which is a super important skill in public speaking.
Okay.
We do it all the time without even realizing it.
And telling a story to get a point across, we all do that, right?
Yeah.
You build suspense, you change your tone. It's not just about giving the facts.
Yeah.
It's about keeping your listener interested.
Totally. And lastly, think about how you're always adapting to feedback when you're talking to someone.
Right.
If someone looks confused, you rephrase. If they seem bored, you try a different angle. You're always adjusting based on how your audience is reacting.
Right.
These are all real-time adjustments. And those same ideas are key in public speaking, even if the feedback isn't as obvious.
So it's not like starting from scratch when it comes to public speaking. We're already using these communication muscles in our day-to-day interactions.
Yeah.
But like you said before, there's some big differences when you move from a small group to speaking to a larger audience.
Yeah.
What are some of those key differences?
That's where it gets really interesting. The source points out 3 main differences. First, public speaking is way more structured.
Okay.
You usually have a time limit, and people don't just interrupt you with questions while you're talking. So you have to plan and organize everything much more carefully beforehand.
Right.
Remember Josh Shipp? He apparently spent almost a year prepping for his TEDx talk.
Wow.
That level of structure and getting ready is a big difference.
That definitely puts my last-minute presentation tweaks in perspective. So more structure and less back and forth. What's the second big difference?
The language you use is usually more formal. In regular conversations, we might use slang, jargon, maybe not perfect grammar, but when you're speaking publicly, you should generally use more polished and elevated language. Okay, it needs to match the occasion and the people listening. People don't usually like it when language is too casual in a formal setting.
Makes sense. You're trying to make a certain impact, come across as authoritative or sincere, and the words you choose are a big part of that. And the third important difference.
How you deliver the speech is different. When we're just chatting, we might talk quietly, say, and like a lot, and have a relaxed posture.
Yeah.
But public speakers need to project their voice, stand up straight and engaging, and avoid distracting habits. It's a more controlled way of communicating that's meant to reach a bigger group.
Okay, so even though we have the basic skills, using them for public speaking requires more planning and refining in terms of structure, language, and delivery. Now, let's talk about something I think everyone can relate to, nervousness, that feeling of stage fright. It's something a lot of people dread.
For sure, and the source talks about this directly, which is actually really helpful.
Okay.
It emphasizes that if you get nervous about public speaking, you're not alone. Actually, a survey in 2014 showed that public speaking was the top fear for a lot of people.
Really?
Even scarier than death in one study.
Wow.
That really shows how intense this anxiety can be for a lot of folks.
That's actually kind of comforting in a weird way.
Right.
It makes it feel normal.
Yeah.
It's good to know I'm not the only one getting sweaty palms thinking about presenting.
And what's even more encouraging is that being nervous is totally normal, even for experienced and successful speakers.
Oh, okay.
The source mentions people like Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill and even modern figures like Oprah Winfrey. They've all said they get stage fright. Even Cicero, the famous Roman speaker, said he'd get pale and shaky before giving speeches.
Wow.
So it's not something that stops you from being a good speaker.
So feeling nervous doesn't mean you're weak or not good at it. It's just a human thing.
Exactly. The key is understanding that this nervousness is often your body getting ready for a situation it thinks is risky. It releases adrenaline. This can make your heart race, make your hands shake, all those feelings. But the goal isn't to completely get rid of this feeling. You probably can't anyway. The goal is to change how you see it and manage it so it works for you.
Reframe it.
Yeah.
How do you go from feeling terrified to something manageable or even helpful?
The source talks about this cool idea of positive nervousness.
Or positive nervousness.
Yeah, you're still nervous, but it's mixed with excitement and energy, not just pure anxiety. You're not overwhelmed. You're energized by it.
Okay.
You're harnessing that adrenaline. Think of it as like stage excitement or stage enthusiasm.
Okay.
That hyped up feeling can actually help you focus and make your delivery more dynamic.
Huh. Interesting.
Like what happens to athletes before a big game.
Positive nervousness. I like that shift in thinking. So how can we actually develop this? How do we get to that feeling of energized focus?
The source gives 6 really practical and proven strategies.
Okay.
The first and maybe the most basic one is to just get experience speaking. Just like learning anything new, the more you do it, the less scary it becomes. A public speaking class, for example, gives you a safe space to practice.
It's like exposure therapy, but in a learning setting.
Yeah.
Makes sense. What was the next tip?
Prepare, prepare, prepare.
Okay.
This is super important. Choosing a topic you're actually interested in and then really getting your speech ready can make you feel way more confident.
Yep.
The source even suggests spending 1 to 2 hours preparing for every minute you'll be speaking.
Wow.
When you really know your stuff inside and out, you're much less likely to worry about forgetting things or getting lost.
That definitely rings true. Feeling unprepared is a huge anxiety trigger. So, experience and thorough preparation. What else can we do?
Think positively.
Okay.
This is all about how you talk to yourself in your head.
Right.
Negative thoughts like, I'm going to totally bomb or everyone's going to be bored, those just make you more anxious.
Yeah.
You have to actively challenge those thoughts and replace them with positive ones. For every negative thought that pops up, try to come up with at least a few positive ones to counter it.
Yeah.
See the situation as a chance to share what you know, connect with people, and get valuable experience.
That's so important. It's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right.
Exactly.
So actively managing that inner voice is key.
Totally. And something that goes hand in hand with positive thinking is visualization.
Okay.
This is about picturing yourself giving the speech successfully.
Okay.
Imagine yourself speaking confidently, connecting with the audience, and feeling good about it afterwards.
Okay.
Athletes use this all the time to improve, and it can be just as helpful for public speakers to build confidence.
So mentally rehearsing a good outcome.
Yes.
I can see how that would make it feel more familiar and less scary. What's the 5th strategy for dealing with nerves?
Realize that most of your nervousness doesn't actually show to the audience.
No.
This is a big realization for a lot of new speakers. You might feel like your heart is pounding and your hands are shaking like crazy, but often the audience can't really tell how nervous you are inside.
Mm.
Most of the time, what you're feeling is much stronger than what people are seeing. Knowing this can really help with self-consciousness and pressure.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I've definitely felt like a total mess inside, and then people have told me how calm I seemed.
Yeah.
It's good to remember that your inner state and how you appear on the outside can be different.
Totally.
What's the last tip for handling nervousness?
Don't try to be perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect speech.
Right.
Everyone, even really experienced speakers, makes little mistakes sometimes. The audience doesn't know what you plan to say, so they probably won't even notice small slip-ups. And even if you make a bigger mistake, it's not usually the disaster you think it'll be. The main goal is to get your message across, not to be absolutely perfect.
Okay.
Sometimes a little mistake can even make you seem more relatable and human.
That's really freeing advice. It takes the pressure off trying to be flawless.
Mm.
So, just to recap our strategies for managing nervousness: get experience, prepare thoroughly, think positively, use visualization, remember that your nerves often don't show, and let go of the need to be perfect.
Yeah.
That's a really useful toolkit. Now, our source also talks about the cool connection between public speaking and critical thinking.
Yeah.
That might not seem obvious to everyone. How do these two things affect each other?
What's really interesting is how closely connected these two essential skills are. Critical thinking, at its heart, is about clear and organized thinking.
Right.
It's about using logic, finding weaknesses in arguments, separating facts from opinions, figuring out if sources are reliable, and evaluating evidence.
Okay.
It's about being a sharp thinker.
So it's about being good at analyzing information and making good judgments.
So how does public speaking fit into all of this?
Well, think about the whole process of getting ready for and giving a speech.
Yeah.
You have to organize your ideas logically.
If your speech is all over the place, it probably means you're not thinking clearly about the topic yourself.
Okay.
On the other hand, a well-structured speech that's easy to follow, that often shows that the speaker has a clear and organized way of thinking.
So the act of structuring a speech actually forces you to think more critically and logically about your topic.
Exactly. And it goes deeper than just organizing. When you're putting your message together, you need to express your ideas clearly and accurately, and that makes you better at thinking clearly and accurately in general.
Right.
When you do research and include evidence and logical reasoning in your speech, you're learning how these critical thinking tools work in a real communication setting, and you can use that in other areas of your life.
Mm.
Plus, when you really listen to other people's speeches, you get better at analyzing and evaluating ideas in different situations.
Okay.
It goes both ways.
So the skills we develop for good public speaking, like organizing our thoughts, backing them up with evidence, and really listening to others, these all help us become better critical thinkers overall.
That's right. Sure. Now, let's shift gears and talk about how communication works.
Okay.
Our source talks about 7 key elements that are always at play.
Yeah, this is a basic model for understanding how communication works, especially when it comes to public speaking.
Okay.
The first element is the speaker. That's you, the one giving a message.
Right.
Your credibility, how much you know about the topic, how well you prepared, your speaking style, even how enthusiastic you are, all of that affects how the audience receives your message.
Enthusiasm definitely feels crucial. If you're not genuinely into what you're talking about, it's hard to get anyone else excited about it.
Absolutely. The second element is the message.
Okay.
That's what the speaker actually communicates. It includes both the words you use and your nonverbal communication.
Okay.
Things like your tone of voice, gestures, how you look, and your eye contact.
Right.
The goal is to make sure the message you want to send is the one the audience actually gets. And the nonverbal part of the message can be even stronger than the words sometimes, right? If you're speaking passionately about something, but your body language is closed off or you look bored, it sends a mixed message to the audience.
For sure. The third element is the channel, which is how the message gets from the speaker to the listener.
Okay.
In a typical public speaking setting, like a presentation in a classroom, the channel is direct. Your classmates see and hear you directly.
Right.
But in other settings, it could be radio, TV, or the internet.
Okay.
Each channel has its own quirks that can change how the message is sent and received.
Right. Next, we have the listener.
Yes.
That's the person or people getting the message.
Yeah.
Our source points out something really important about how each listener filters the message through their own unique frame of reference.
Yes.
Can you explain that a bit more?
What's really important to understand here is that every listener has their own background.
Okay.
Their knowledge, experiences, goals, values, and attitudes. No two people have the exact same frame of reference, which means that what your message means to you as the speaker will never be exactly the same for every single person listening.
Right.
That's why understanding your audience and adapting to them is so important in public speaking. You need to connect with their frame of reference.
Because you need to tailor your message to their understanding and perspective so it makes sense and is relevant to them.
Exactly. The fifth element is feedback.
Okay.
These are messages, often nonverbal cues, that listeners send back to the speaker during the presentation.
Okay.
It could be nodding, smiling, looking confused, even fidgeting or shuffling their feet.
Right.
As a speaker, you have to pay attention to this feedback and be ready to change your message or delivery based on what you see.
So even if people aren't talking during the speech, there's still a constant flow of information going back and forth. And the sixth element is interference. This sounds like anything that can mess up the communication process.
Yeah, exactly. Interference can be external, like noise in the room, things you can see that distract you, or even uncomfortable temperatures.
Right.
But it can also be internal to the listener.
Okay.
Maybe they have a headache, they're worried about something, or they have biases about the speaker or topic.
Okay.
As a speaker, your job is to try and minimize any interference and keep the audience engaged despite these distractions.
Got it. And finally, the seventh element is the situation.
Yes.
That refers to the specific time and place where the speech is happening.
Right. The context really matters. The occasion for the speech, the environment, the audience's expectations, all of these situational factors can have a big impact on how the speech is received.
Right.
For example, a speech given at a graduation ceremony will be very different from a business presentation trying to get new clients.
Right. Very different vibe and purpose.
Exactly. Good speakers are aware of the situation and adapt their message and style accordingly.
So these 7 elements, the speaker, the message, the channel, the listener, feedback, interference, and the situation are always interacting and shaping how well the communication goes. Understanding this process gives you a much clearer picture of what makes communication effective. Now, we live in a world that's more connected and diverse than ever,
Total.
and our source really emphasizes how important cultural awareness is in public speaking.
Yeah.
This feels especially relevant in today's globalized world.
It's absolutely crucial. The U.S., like the source points out, has always been a diverse place, and globally, we're more connected than ever.
Yeah.
This growing cultural diversity makes public speaking even more complex.
Right.
Obvious differences, like language barriers, are just the beginning. Even things like gestures and facial expressions, which seem universal, can mean different things in different cultures.
Oh, yeah.
A gesture that's fine in one culture could be really offensive in another.
Right.
Like the OK sign, which is usually positive in North America, can be taken negatively in some other parts of the world.
That's a great example of how easily people can misunderstand each other if they're not aware of cultural differences.
And the source talks about ethnocentrism. That's basically believing that your own culture and way of doing things is better than everyone else's.
Right.
While group pride can be good, ethnocentrism can lead to prejudice and really get in the way of communicating with people from different backgrounds.
So as speakers, we need to be aware of our own potential biases and make sure we don't force our own values and assumptions on the audience.
Exactly. Avoiding ethnocentrism doesn't mean you have to agree with every cultural practice out there.
Right.
But it does mean being respectful of other people's beliefs, values, and customs, even if they're different from your own.
Okay.
When you're preparing a speech, you need to think about how cultural factors might affect how your audience understands your message.
Right.
Try to see things from their point of view.
Okay.
Be careful about language that could be misunderstood or offensive, and choose visuals and examples that are inclusive and culturally sensitive. The same goes for when you're the listener.
Right.
Be open-minded when you're listening to speakers from different cultures. And don't judge them based on their appearance or speaking style, which might be influenced by their cultural norms.
So being culturally sensitive is about recognizing cultural differences, being respectful, and changing your communication to connect with a diverse audience.
Exactly.
It's a crucial skill in our multicultural world, whether we're speaking or listening.
Absolutely. And by keeping these key ideas in mind, understanding the power and history of public speaking, seeing how it connects to our everyday conversations, while also being different, learning how to manage nervousness, making the most of the link between good communication and critical thinking, getting the 7 parts of the communication process, and being culturally aware, you're setting yourself up to be a more confident, skilled, and effective communicator in all parts of your life.
Totally. So let's recap what we've talked about in this deep dive. We started by acknowledging public speaking as a powerful tool with a long and interesting history.
Yes.
We then looked at the surprising ways it's similar to our everyday conversations, but also how it's different in structure, language, and delivery. We talked about how common nervousness is when it comes to public speaking, and gave some practical tips for managing it, like thinking positively and using visualization.
Yeah.
We explored the close link between clear communication and strong critical thinking.
Yes.
We broke down the 7 parts of communication and discussed how they work together. And lastly, we stressed the importance of being culturally sensitive and avoiding ethnocentrism in our increasingly diverse world.
And the thing is, these skills and understandings aren't just for formal presentations. The things we talked about today can make all of your communication better.
Right.
Whether you're in a class discussion, a business meeting, or just chatting with a friend or family member, it's about becoming more thoughtful and intentional in how you connect and communicate with people.
So as you go about your day, maybe think about how you can apply 1 or 2 of these things we've talked about. Maybe try to reframe those pre-conversation jitters with some positive self-talk. Or maybe try to be more aware of your listener's background and perspective the next time you explain a complicated idea. Think about how understanding these core principles of public speaking can help you communicate with more impact, confidence, and cultural sensitivity in every situation.